Hello, good morning. A very warm welcome to the Inclusion and Diversity Step Changing Performance in Operations webinar. I hope everyone can hear me. It's top of the hour, so we'll be starting the webinar now. I'm here with my colleague, Jacques Berendt. My name is Sue Johnson. I work at PwC and lead the client consulting on diversity and inclusion. I must say that's a lovely photograph of me. I looked like that on my wedding day and this particular day. You probably wouldn't notice me in the street from that. But Jacques, if you'd like to just introduce yourself briefly.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Jacques Berendt. I'm a manager here at PwC Geneva, and I'm very happy to present this exciting research today to you.
So in terms of everybody, you're put on mute. This is to make sure we get rid of all the background noise. And if you have any questions at any time, please use the chat function and just type in your question, and there'll be plenty of times for questions at the end. We hope to present in about 30 minutes to leave lots of times for questions and discussions afterwards. So the agenda for today, I'm going to rush through what is inclusion and diversity. Then we're going to talk a lot about inclusion and diversity in operations. Top tips, what you can do if it's an area you want to focus on. And then, like I say, most importantly, lots of time for the questions. So a bit about diversity and inclusion. I really love this diagram in terms of diversity is all about valuing everyone who's different. But the important bit is the inclusion in terms of making everyone feel wanted and welcome. So in terms of some great metaphors, diversity is about being asked to play football, but actually inclusion is when someone passes you the ball. Diversity is when you're being asked to the disco, but inclusion is when you're being asked to dance. So more and more we're seeing companies really now focusing on inclusion because that is the ultimate goal. So in terms of how diverse is the world today, I think this is a very clever graphic in terms of if the world were a village of 100 people, just to really show what's happening in the world. In terms of age, 70% are adults, 30% are children, but that is actually changing over time in different parts of the world. Japan is aging desperately, whereas Africa is very young. In gender, it's almost 50-50 the split, slightly more women. In terms of different abilities, they say 1 in 6 people have a different physical or mental ability. And in fact, 1 in 3 of us are related or know somebody who has a different physical or mental ability. And this is something that's very much on the increase around the world. And so something we need to focus on, making sure we're really including this part of our population. In terms of nationality, a great spread across the world, nearly 60% of the world population in Asia. And finally, sexual orientation. Research says about 1 in 10 people have a sexual orientation of LGBT+, but hard to measure. But just say, well, diversity is really turning the world upside down, because now to be young is to be more experienced. Some of you might be having some reverse mentoring programs, for example, around digital. To be out is to be in. It's great. It's far more accepted now around the world, your different sexual orientation. And to be in the minority, particularly from a nationality perspective, means that more and more you're going to be in the majority. And so diversity is very much turning the world upside down. And just as fear leads to anger, which can lead to the dark side, if any of you are Star Wars fans, actually inclusion leads to engagement, leads to operational excellence. So a high-performing logistics and manufacturing organization, which is what we want to spend the time talking today on this webinar. So, why is it important? So there's been a lot of research talking about inclusion and diversity and how it shows that the importance in terms of building customer relationships, matching the market, making sure you're attracting the top talent to your organization. It improves the bottom line with regards to financial performance, and also leads to better quality of decision making, leading to higher innovation. And so this is why many organizations are working on inclusion and diversity. But if you come from the operations sector, which I spent 15 years working in logistics and supply chain. It's like, well, how's that going to help me increase my pick rate? And so today we really want to focus on specific operations KPIs. And so from a working environment in operations, how specifically does inclusion and diversity lead to higher performance? So the first one we want to talk about is employee safety. If you have an inclusive culture, it's very much a speak-up culture. People feel they can comment when they see things that are unsafe or challenge current ways of working. And for example, I was reading a report by Network Rail, which is a very important area for them safety. And they said, well, the lowest engaged teams actually had 19% more accidents. And so a real kind of key business case about why inclusion was important to them in an area of focus. If you look at working conditions, if you have a more inclusive work environment, there are better working conditions. We've worked with clients where we've seen a 30% reduction in absenteeism, followed by having more balance and diversity on the shop floor. People feel they need to come to work. There's a very famous study, the BMW 2017 line, where they recognized they had an aging population, and so what do they need to change in their workplace to make sure people could work throughout their entire working lives. And they found that on this line, where they had more senior employees, they had absenteeism of 2% lower than average. And I've also had feedback, I'd like to hear yours too, in terms of you have less union issues, you have less alcoholism, for example, where you have a more diverse team. People just behave better, to quote a factory manager. In terms of quality, the quality of the products that are produced, you see lower defect rates in a more inclusive environment, and definitely a right first time mentality. So in terms of some statistics, we've seen some clients have 38% reduction in the defect rate post high performing team training, and almost 30% decrease in defect rates following valuing difference training. So really talking about investing in people, the importance of listening to others, working with others, shared goals, etc. And people feel more pride, more engagement, and so higher quality products. In terms of problem solving, you had this culture of continuous improvement by really engaging everyone's opinion. Honda have a One Circle initiative where they basically empower their workforce to come up with solutions to business challenges. And I remember reading one case study about how they had a problem with spraying the engine chassis. And so because of dust on the line, the paint doesn't stick to the metal. And so they solved this by literally hanging sort of and it was still with a new Jeep, which had an inbuilt roof rack. And so they fixed it by almost hanging a chair upside down from the ceiling and attaching an ostrich feather to it. I'm not doing them a justice here from an engineering perspective, but it meant that that could get underneath the built-in roof rack. And so then rather than having to stop the line and someone cleaning it manually with a glove, they basically could keep the line running, they could speed it up, there was less waste, and it saved hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just in one production plant. So a great example of where by talking to people, empowering them, including them, listening to their opinions, you have better problem solving. And finally, machine productivity. You really want to reduce those unplanned stoppages. I remember talking to a factory manager about his dream factory was having one product to make 24 hours a day, because actually most quality incidents and safety incidents happen during unplanned stoppages. And so where they've done inclusion training and valuing difference training on a factory, they had almost 50% reduction in unplanned stoppages. And so again, the positive cycle in terms of safety, quality, working conditions, etc. So there are just some examples of where by having a diverse and inclusive working environment, it can specifically link to those key operations KPIs around quality, cost, and safety. So if it's something that you think, well, we have an opportunity to make our operations community more inclusive, what are we going to do? How are the steps to really make that happen, to drive performance? So in our experience, we have a 4-step roadmap to really embed this in your organization. And the first thing is to really make it personal and relevant, because if you talk about McKinsey case studies, HBR case studies, which I've read, I think are stunning, in terms of manufacturing, it's like, well, what does that actually mean to me when my KPIs around quality, cost, and safety? And so it's having a very clear correlation between operation KPIs and the levels of inclusion and diversity in a team. So really engage the head. Second thing is have a change plan, but embed it in the operations DNA. And so then leaders and employees own and deliver the action plan. I remember in one factory, the factory manager said, well, we have to own it because the HR sit in a porter cabin 5 minutes walk away, and we see them once a week on payday. And so actually, if there's any organization that can truly own this and deliver it, to me, it's the operations community. So making sure they're using the standards and the language of operations, particularly, for example, if you follow lean manufacturing techniques. The other thing I found in operations is the speed of change, in terms of once it's agreed, it starts happening tomorrow. So an opportunity to really have some fast changes in KPIs. The third thing, as always, ensure all employees have the skills to deliver the plan. So upskilling their teams to leverage the differences to benefit the operation. And this could be around, for example, constructive conflict, speaking up, different skills required depending on your culture in the factory or warehouse. And fourthly, and most importantly, I think the bit that sometimes we forget to really work on because we're so excited we've done the first three, is inclusion becomes part of the day job, making sure it's owned by everybody. It sticks in our daily language and the DNA of what we do. And so using some, for example, inclusion nudges, and I'll come on to those later. But anyway, I want to hand over to Jacques now, who can talk specifically around step one, around making it personal, your business case.
Yes, thank you, Sue. So as Sue explained, there is quite some research out there, very interesting research about the link between diversity and performance in companies, but it's not always easy for companies to determine exactly how relevant this research is to them, how this applies to them, especially in the context they operate in the industry, for instance, they're operating in. So we're very happy also to have a chance to partner with a company who was really into diversity and inclusion efforts. They wanted actually they wanted us to help them also run a small internal study on the link between diversity and inclusion. Purpose of this was maybe to help them also determine if it was worth investing in D&I at all, if something was happening there, and what could be done out of the research we would do for them. So we were approached by this company, and we asked them actually to provide us with some information on their teams in production, elements of diversity, elements of performance. The purpose of this would be to try to link these data together. And so people from HR were actually helping us gather the data, and so they shared this data with us in order for us to run the study. So in such cases, we can think of many indicators of diversity, many different indicators of performance, and depending on the context, the company we would run the study for, we could find one or the element as more relevant as the others. In terms of diversity, we can speak of technical diversity. This is people's set of skills, experience, previous roles in the company or outside the company. We can speak of demographic diversity. This is gender, generation, geographical origin. So it's not only about gender. Much of this research that has been published also is about gender-based diversity. We were happy also in this case to include other elements that contribute to team's diversity. And we could also think of, in some cases, if companies have some information on personality profiles, thinking styles, etc., we could also think of cognitive diversity as an element we would want to include. In terms of performance, and when it comes to production, we could consider production rate, production efficiency, productivity, scrap, and first pass yield. In this case, this is what we used. We could also want to look at personal investment, overtime, absenteeism, and health and safety issues also. So told you about these elements, and research already shows that in teams who were trained and where an inclusive mindset prevailed, there were much less accidents and material damage. So we had a number of teams that HR was able to gather data for. They provided us with some information on diversity indicators, personal diversity, this is gender, age, and nationality for every single person in the sample. Professional diversity, also we could gather data on their seniority, that is time spent within the company and the number of previous roles they occupied. When it comes to performance indicators, productivity, first pass yield, scrap, and there's also something we had to take care of when it comes to production in this very wide company operating with machines. We needed also to control for automation and percentage of manual process and correct the analysis. For these two elements, we were also able to take into account. And so this was also interesting for us to see exactly what was important to this company, how we could come up with a score for diversity and performance. And then if we move to the next slide, we can also show you the results of this analysis. Simply put, statistically speaking, we use an indicator. This is a correlation. Some of you might know what this is about, but correlation is an indication of the link between two elements. And in the entire sample, within different teams we looked at, overall, there is a link, positive link between diversity and performance. So overall, this means that the higher, the greater the diversity within the teams, the better the performance of the team. And so when it comes to comparing more and less diverse teams, we were able to see that among more diverse teams, there was 1.2% less scrap than within less diverse teams, 5.6% more first pass yield, and 0.17% more productivity. And so it was also interesting to see that on a number of indicators, actually, we could see a positive effect of diversity on performance. We also had additional elements of information. Very interestingly, company shared also the number of suggestions made by the employees, suggestions for improvement. And we were also able to see that the more diverse the teams, the less suggestions they were, which means that overall, people are more happy about how things work. There is less space for improvement when the teams are actually able to take care of these any issue themselves. There's more communication. Again, the benefits of diversity. And in teams who were less diverse, then there were more issues and more recommendations for improvement. Another element of information we also wanted to share with you is that with the same company, we were able to run similar analysis in another department. This was production. We've showed you all these results about. We're also able to look at the sales teams, perform exactly the same type of analysis on different performance indicators relevant to the sales force. And we found, again, exactly the same link, positive link between diversity and performance. So this was also great, really interesting findings, interesting to us, obviously, but also to the company, who was then also able to base their future decisions on data, on actual facts that came from within the company. And so the purpose of this exercise was as well to make this personal, again, to show how diversity is linked to performance within this company. And we're very happy also to help the company achieve this goal.
So thanks for that, Jacques. A bit of science behind it. So going to step 2, which is, make a plan. Where do you want to go? Define a roadmap of how you can embed inclusion within the DNA of operations. And so you can see here, for example, we start off with, well, how inclusive are we? Looking at the value chain, so going up and down your partnerships, how are you doing with regards to your suppliers? Because it's really key, particularly in a just-in-time manufacturing environment, that your suppliers are aware of what you're working on, what's important, how you want to collaborate, how you want to communicate, and then downstream to your customers and clients and stakeholders you engage with. So to me, I think in operations, there's a big opportunity to expand beyond the four walls of the factory or the warehouse to really become more inclusive much faster with partners. Then from your employees, understanding their perception, then making it relevant to operations, the business case, and then very much moving from insight to action. So working with the employees in terms of where are the opportunities. To me, it's lean plus, because you're empowering the workforce, wanting to listen to them, and putting them in charge in terms of creating an inclusive workplace. And so then defining some governance. What are you going to be measuring to making sure you're improving, you're making progress, looking at some leading and lagging KPIs, and then continually building on the action plans. And I've got some examples of how you can do that going forward. So number 3 is equipping leaders and teams for success. So, in my experience, everybody we work with is a good person, but people have biases and they're conscious and unconscious. And if they weren't inclusive yesterday, they're not going to be inclusive tomorrow unless you tell them, well, this is how you need to work, how you need to behave, how you need to communicate, how you need to be a team member. And most people are like, I've got it now. This is what I need to do. And so it's really, I think the equipment, upskilling is very important. Because actually, all the research shows that diverse teams do outperform homogeneous teams. Some research here talks about a third higher. But the reality is, if you're working in a diverse team, as I'm sure you've all experienced, it can be exhausting because people don't get you, don't see your point of view, they challenge you more. So actually, you feel that your effectiveness is lower because perhaps decisions take longer, and also your confidence is low because you're constantly being challenged. But the actual final results are better. And so this is where, for example, training people on effective communication. So how can you have this constructive dialogue to share ideas, but make it so people don't feel that it's a personal onslaught, to be honest with you. So the constructive conflict, how the problem-solving process, and get people to recognize that it is good to have conflict, but give people the techniques to get to conflict resolution. I first started working in a distribution center over 20 years ago, and there was only one way to get over constructive conflict, and that was just to shout at each other and then go to the pub. But obviously we've moved on since there. But definitely how to have constructive conflict. And finally, group process skills, how to work effectively in teams, because in operations, it's usually everything's at the team level in terms of shifts, how you manage lines, and making sure you involve the whole team all the time. So moving on to step 4, sustain the change, which I think sometimes we kind of forget or perhaps aren't as strong as we could be. So here are just some examples of how you can sustain the change to really embed this new way of working into the daily language and way of life. So one example could be, create a 1-point lesson on effective listening and embed into ongoing and new starter training. So everyone has a shared language and understanding of what's expected of them regarding how we listen and how we work with each other. So enable participative, not consultative decision making. And so change from individual actions to team tasks. So when perhaps you have a shift handover or a team meeting, rather than having individuals, giving it to groups of people to make sure you've got these diverse perspectives and everyone feels ownership. Another point could be, visibly eliminate waste the consumer doesn't value. For example, one client talked about how when we had the head office team, we used to create these huge factory booklets with lots of KPIs and pictures and initiatives. It took so much time and they were read for 2 minutes. And so actually they just reduced them, removed them, and had a quick Q&A with the workforce and showed them the KPIs on the board. And so the people felt there was less time being wasted. And so really saying, we're going to listen to you and we're going to eliminate waste that isn't valued. And perhaps during these factory visits, shift from the formal presentations to Q&A sessions, because you tend to find that in formal presentations, the same people tend to be put forward, perhaps people more confident in speaking, perhaps more the extroverts. Whereas if you move to Q&A sessions, everyone has a voice because you go to the specific knowledge expert to answer the question. Next one could be around providing budget around operations improvement. So empower the operators to implement their suggestions for what they've come up with. So for example, one client put in place anything under $200 doesn't need pre-approval. Just get on and buy it and put the receipt through the petty cash at the office. However, all other spend does go through usual operating procedure because they found that most requests were very low. And so then it speeded up the improvement process. People felt empowered. They were listened to. And this is where you get this everyone wanting to contribute to making the machines run smoother, faster. So you're having higher quality product, less safety issues, and delivered on time to the client. And finally, making sure the leaders constantly debate the values of inclusion and leveraging differences within all the operators. This could be, for example, around reach truck drivers. I was working with someone in Japan who talked about they went from 100% men reach truck drivers to specifically recruiting some women, and they found that there was less damage to the racking, to the products. There was far more care, and then they all talked about it. Why was that? And the men were saying, "Well, I feel it's a really competitive environment, so I have to drive faster than somebody else to really, we have a job and finish concept, and so then I want to drive fast, but that's actually causing more mistakes. But now I've seen other people doing it differently. I feel more relaxed and I take more care." And so an example of just getting people to talk about why they behave the way they do, what they can do to improve it, and how it's good to share and learn. So in summary, I am a Star Wars fan, as you might have noticed, and may the force be with you in terms of implementing inclusion and diversity in operations. I think from the organizations I've worked with, we tend to focus on the head office workforce, whereas in operations, I think there's an opportunity to make an impact, a very big impact, and very quickly, because you tend to have a higher turnover of staff. And one of the fastest ways you can change the diversity of your workforce is the recruitment. And so a big opportunity to work on that. And also in terms of the working culture, it's quite top-down, it's quite rules-based. It has to be in a factory environment. And so once agreed and everyone on board, you can change the working culture very quickly. And so I think it's a real opportunity. So like I say, we're a team of people focusing on helping companies on inclusion and diversity, sharing what we're learning, hoping to give you some tips about what you can do in your organization. Here are the 4 steps we talked about today. So step 1 is make it personal, create a bespoke business case, really engage the head. Then you've got make a plan, an inspirational strategy, so engage the heart. Then you've got equip for success, really upskilling people, so you're engaging the hands, giving people the ability to think that I can do this now. And then to me, the most important is make it stick. And so we've talked for half an hour. That was the goal. So I'm now going to hand over to you. And does anyone have any questions? Then I have a question for the audience then. So is anyone working on inclusion and diversity in their operations environment, be it warehousing, factories, any supply chain points?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Jana Kutava. I work at CERN in the diversity office. So CERN is a organization performing fundamental science research based in Geneva, between France and Switzerland, both countries.
Thank you for that. Are you working on this area specifically? I know CERN does a lot in diversity and inclusion.
Yes, I am one of the 2 members of our not huge diversity office.
Having a big impact, I'm sure. So what are you doing with your scientists at the moment?
There are many different projects and initiatives we are leading together with other units. One of the major dimensions of the diversity program here at CERN has to do with gender equality. As I'm sure most of the people already know, most of the science institutions do confront some challenges to attracting female talent. which is an issue that also stems from the representation of women on the educational levels already. So we do lead a lot of initiatives that have to do with gender equality in science, technology, and engineering. But of course, it's not limited to that, but just to give an example.
You want to give an example of what you're doing to attract more women into CERN?
Yes, sure. There's many different things. One of the things we do is to adapt our communications, including press releases, photos, videos, the communication we do for recruitment, to be representing the diversity of CERN. So we make sure to promote different people in images and videos and so on, except for the stereotypical image of a scientist. So that would include women, people with disabilities, of course, people from different ethnicities with different skin tone, and so on and so forth. But of course, the diversity program does many more things. But just to give an example, since you asked.
Thank you for that.
Sue, we have a few questions that came in. So one of the questions is, do you have any recommendations to make inclusiveness stick?
So thank you, whoever asked that one. Yeah, I think, again, it needs to be tailored to the culture of your company or organization. So to make it stick, I think it's how can you embed it into, for example, all training. So moving away from having specific diversity and inclusion training or unconscious bias into all training, new starters, ongoing leadership training. And so put it into the training all the time in every course that you can. Look at the communication, in terms of what you're doing. So sharing with people internally and externally the importance of inclusion, and this is what we're doing, the progress we're making, the activities we're working on. I think it's engaging beyond the four walls of the organization, up and down the value chain. So making it just go beyond your organization, working with partners, working with clients and stakeholders. And then it's almost like you can't give up or stop on it. You have to keep going because you've gone outside your organization. You've made a commitment. But to me, the biggest thing I've seen is telling people 2 or 3 things they can do every day.
Okay, so maybe to take over on her answer while she comes back to us. I think she was also about to tell you that it's important just to identify 2 or 3 elements to focus on a daily basis. Very simple things that people can think of over and over and to try to apply in their everyday activities. I would also add to this that in order for this to stick also, I think beyond setting objectives, strategy, it's also important to develop a set of indicators that people from top management could also want to look at on a regular basis. So there are obviously some diversity indicators, but whenever you define a new strategy, you come up with a new objective in terms of increasing diversity and inclusion. You could also try to find a way to measure your progress towards this objective. And I think also it's sometimes a field where people have a lot of goodwill. We do set up some very interesting actions, initiatives, but we sometimes forget to measure the impact of this. And it's also very useful just to make sure and see if we're on track or not. Always very useful to try to find a way to measure the impact of our efforts.
So we have another question, which is somebody telling us that a lot of work goes on overtime in the factory, and everything additional goes on overtime again. So how would you tackle that?
Sue mentioned how important it is also to get top management involved in the program, in the efforts towards diversity and inclusion. And actually, the purpose of the research we've presented to you was for people from HR to go back to the CEO of the company and to convince them actually that it was kind of useful to invest more time, more resources into D&I projects. And so obviously, it's sometimes difficult to develop new projects when we have a lack of time and resources. And it's always very important to receive the support also from management. It's also important, I'd say, when the company really wants to show how committed the company is to these matters, it's also important that it steps out of the HR team and HR business. It's important also that people in top management do commit to these principles, show they are committed, not only in nice declarations, but it's also important that they walk the talk. And so in this case, again, we were happy also to help people from HR continue the conversation and start thinking of what could be done in the next steps with their top management.
Super, thank you. I hope that answers the question. We have another question, which is, do your learnings through operations also apply to other environments?
Well, I personally haven't spent so much time in so many years in such environments myself. What I could say from the research we've done actually is that it might depend. In general, we could expect that diversity leads to better performance. There is much to gain out of diversity because of the diverse opinions we have in the team, the diverse workforce, and the synergies this could create. So I would expect that there is a lot to gain out of diversity. Then the question is how to make the best out of it. And this could require also taking into account the specific industry we're working in, the context, the company specificities, and even the culture. I mean, diversity without inclusion, again, won't lead to many improvements. So the idea is that it could depend, and we could run similar studies in several areas. I would hope to see, in general, a positive effect of diversity on performance. But if we do see that the link is not so clear, not as positive as expected, then according to our analysis, it would only indicate that there are some efforts to be put into creating a more inclusive culture as well.
Super, thank you. Next question is about how to talk about diversity, especially cognitive diversity. People are sticking to the gender balance KPI and forget about other parameters of diversity. What are your recommendations on that?
Well, obviously, gender is one of the elements of diversity people easily think of. There are many other elements people could think of and about which we already have data. Basically, it's easier to base this analysis and to think about diversity when we do have some elements of information. We can think about gender, obviously, but also people's age, nationality, etc. This is all information that people in HR usually have and could use in the conversation about diversity. When it comes to cognitive diversity, thinking styles, personality tests, sometimes in some companies, people have gone through these tests at the moment of the recruitment. So if the data is still available also to HR, it could be also interesting to include this. And I do believe that there are some practices also around composition of teams based on personality profiles. It sometimes could be interesting to have a look at what is the best combination, who could be working with whom, depending on their cognitive and thinking styles as well. So this, I believe, also is something you could put on the table, especially when it comes to getting the best out of diversity. Diversity is not just what people can see. It's not just gender. It's not just age. Actually, the real value of diversity is also diversity in ideas. And when it comes to cognitive diversity, I think this is a really good element and closely related to how diverse a team can get when it comes to thinking style and generating ideas. So if you talk about innovation, then I think you could easily put into the equation something related to cognitive diversity.
Super, thank you. We have, coming back on another question we've already answered. It's mentioned, it was about the question of overtime. So it would seem that the overtime is not in the HR team itself, but on the shop floor. So again, how would you manage this overtime?
Trying to understand the overtime, then it will be about the time people spend on, well, working in these projects that have been set up by HR, and overtime is actually not tracked by HR. This is what I would understand. And so the question was how to deal with this overtime?
Exactly.
Well, again, I think it's important to receive the support from above and people who can invest and open up the resources necessary for people to maybe get off their machines, spend some time working specifically on these projects. And I think it's really a matter of resource investment, of willingness again, and showing the commitment of top management in these questions. It is obviously difficult for people to be managing several projects at the same time. They all have their job to do, and it's difficult also to bring people on these projects when they already have so much to do. If you want to really design a successful project, it's also important that people have space to invest some time in there, and so that they also maybe are given some time off just to focus on these projects.
Do you have any recommendations regarding diversity trainings and its effectiveness?
Diversity trainings and its effectiveness. Well, I think Sue already mentioned a couple of these trainings. I mean, obviously, whenever we take decisions about the employee's career, it's important also to keep in mind that we might be biased. So we can always think of unconscious bias trainings. When it comes to creating a more inclusive culture, also you can work on communication within the team, how to solve problems, to overcome conflict, to also train people in terms of learning how to listen, also to provide constructive feedback and efficient feedback in order to improve also the performance of these teams. Other trainings, it depends really on the target, I guess. If it's about people working in the teams, helping them also to work better. It could be also targeting people from HR, and really the type of training could really depend on the audience we're targeting. But there are a couple of suggestions already made by Sue, and I think we could also provide you, maybe if you have more specific questions regarding the context in which you operate, in your own projects, I think we could also help you find some specific and tailor-made solutions.
Perfect. We have another question, which is about introducing the concept of D&I to blue-collar workforce. As they don't attend regularly training and other meetings, how would you work with that?
Well, interestingly enough, I don't think it's necessary to really speak about D&I, about diversity, about inclusion, in order for teams to be inclusive, or maybe to avoid any bias based on gender. If we try to bring their focus to what is there to gain out of sharing ideas, for instance, what is there to gain also out of talking, speaking out loud, then I think we can already gain a lot out of diversity. If we try to create a culture where everyone is able to speak up, where the hierarchy, whatever the decisions they make, whatever the communication they make can be challenged on their choices, on their ideas, then there's already good potential for innovation, for sharing good ideas within the teams. So we don't necessarily need to use these terms, I think, to build a very diverse and inclusive culture. And I think really, again, it depends on every particular situation, but there could also be solutions that are very simple and, again, evolve around communication skills.
Thank you. We have no further questions at the moment.
So if there's no further question at this moment, I would invite any one of you just to reach out to us. We will share the presentation again, make it available to you. You have our contact details, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And if there's no further question for now, well, I wanted to thank you all also for attending, to apologize also for the technical issues and for losing Sue on the way. But I'm sure also she shared the pleasure I had to present all this to you. And we truly hope that this presentation was also very insightful and will help you also think differently about your everyday activities. Okay, so this is it on my side. If there's no further question, then again, thank you everyone and have a nice day.